my buddy Gil gave me a book that he found called Michigan's Heartland, 1900 to 1918, and that was written by Forrest Meek. And it is a compendium of fascinating information about Michigan, Michigan's heartland in that period. Now, one that I found particularly interesting is about bad weather, because I've always been interested in weather, and my son David, if he could be anything at all in the world that he wanted to be, it would be a storm chaser. So I wanted to share with you this because I think it's really quite interesting. I don't think we get storms like this anymore, or not very often, at least in my part of Michigan. Anyways, in speaking of the lumbering era and what it did to the forests of Michigan, I'd like to quote. It says here, "The denuded hills and plains of northern Michigan were ravaged again and again by the most violent electrical storms that can be imagined during the early years of this century, the early 1900s. Some theorized that the trees provided some measure of neutralizing effect on the weather, and when they were gone, nature ran amok. And being that they started once the lumbering industry had cleared out our forests, that's when the storm started. So maybe there is some validity to that. The spring storm, a spring storm hit Sheridan Township in 1903 especially hard, setting fires to many buildings and killing horses, cattle, hogs. Nelson Carroll reported 3 horses were killed by one stroke of immense voltage, and a year later Hamilton was hit by lightning, then hail, and the farms of William Nash, George Van Horn, George Stockton, John Myers, Orr Campbell, Charles Keenster, and Sam Wilson were covered with ice and water 6 inches deep, and the peas and potatoes were totally destroyed. Now the Latter-day Saints area was hit by lightning in 1905, and some relatives from Hamilton were meeting with Elder Joseph Bittler's home, or in his home, when the bolt came down the chimney to his right side. Check this out, to his right side and hip, and out his shoe, shredding his shoe. It burned a hole in his foot. Charles Bittler had his arm and a path across his chest totally burned, as the flash came out of his left shoe, shattering that one also. William Bittler had 2 daughters in the same room, but neither of them were injured. The lightning continued across the floor into a hole where it went down and ground it out. And it's a wonder that nobody was killed in that, although I'm sure Mr. Bittler probably felt for a while like he wished he had it then. 3 weeks later, a $1 million storm ripped through Gratiot County and parts of Isabella. $100,000 worth of buildings were destroyed in Gratiot alone. And Alma, St. Louis, Kalamazoo, Detroit, Mount Pleasant, and Forest Hills were subjected to immense hail, and wheat crops were leveled. Rain poured out of the skies as masses of cold, dark clouds seethed overhead. Hurricane winds drove the fist-sized hail onto and through roofs and siding. One report said that hail 13 inches in diameter smashed every window facing north in the whole town of Alma. An extraordinary amount of rain fell in Vernon and Wise area, including 8 inches in Clare. Hailstones in Vassar covered the ground to nearly a foot in depth, and Sheridan Township said that it was the most water on the ground at one time in over 17 years. 14 months later, another electrical storm roared into Greenwood, Hayes, Frost, and Franklin Townships. Lightning strikes were continuous for 1/2 hour, and hail, which accompanied it, broke every window in the courthouse there, the Clare County Courthouse, that were exposed to the windward side. Since most of the exposure was toward the north, the 140 windows broken were nearly all that were in the building. By now, salesmen cruising the country looking for customers had no trouble in in disposing of their lightning rods. I suppose not. Nearly every farm building began looking like a porcupine, and some went out and planted a grove of trees around the homestead, also to help protect against the lightning. But lightning visited Clare on July 4th, 1913, when a full day of activities was scheduled. A baseball game was interrupted abruptly when Dark clouds descended over the fairground on East First Street. A large crowd had gathered for the races Dave Ward was promoting, and when the bolt struck the judges' stand, two young men fell about 20 feet to the ground dead.